I love those churches out there, man. I saw one the other day that says, "Where the church where everybody's somebody, but Jesus is Lord." Yeah, people say, "You think Jesus is coming back?" Sure. What's it been, 2,000 years? Boy, I sure don't want to dampen anybody's optimism here. He's up in heaven right now. They're going, "Why don't you go back down to earth? Be a symbol of peace and love to the world, help." He's going, "Yeah, sure. Help, huh? Yeah, I'd like to help. Tell him I'll be there as soon as I can play the piano again."
He's known as the Screamer. He shouts twisted jokes about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and he's dated Jessica Hahn. Once a Pentecostal preacher, Sam Kinison now claims that the Bible has been doctored to hide the mortifying mental breakdown of Jesus. Kinison's microphone is often used to demonstrate Jesus urinating, to depict the sexual organ Jesus wants to force-feed his disciples, and to represent the hammer which nails Jesus to the cross. Kinison purposely perverts passages of the Bible and portrays Jesus as a vindictive lunatic. Audiences delight over his antics. Ex-girlfriend Jessica Hahn adores him. She claims he is funny, intelligent, and that he loves God. Kinison is one of many comedians who ridicule Christianity and mock religion. George Carlin, also known as Mr. Seven Dirty Words, says he's sick of church people and accuses ministers of being book-burning morons. He feels that it's his right as an American to use any words he wants to, especially the 7 words prohibited on radio or television by the Federal Communications Commission. To George Carlin, the First Amendment and freedom of choice mean the privilege to sling oral obscenities at his audience. In today's comedy acts, entertainers do everything from taking God's name in vain to ridiculing specific religious beliefs in foul fashion. Sacrilegious slander remains uncensored on HBO and Showtime. Where do we draw the line on the insults against God and religion? Some, like Carlin, argue that censorship is a sure indication of authoritarianism and a society's lack of confidence in itself. Others would say sacrilegious satire has gone too far. Contemporary comedy constantly defiles what should be left alone. In addition to Kinison and Carlin, Robin Williams frequently ridicules religion. He pokes fun at the Pope and makes cracks about Christian practices. Comedian Dennis Miller complains he's encountered numerous happy Christians who feel the need to be, quote, born again and again like some evangelical Gabor sister, end quote. Sam Kinison says he's not worried about going to hell for his satire.
I think it's terrible that there are TV stations that won't even advertise condom because of pressure from religious groups. Isn't that ignorant? Shouldn't it be great if we found out you could only get AIDS by giving money to television preachers? Television preachers are amazing. They say God talks to them. God talks to them, and they can only get a show on cable?
Imagine that, Reverend. You can actually change the station. It's called freedom of choice, and it's one of the principles this country was founded upon. Look it up in the library, Reverend, if you have any of them left when you finish burning all the books.
Woo, I've done it, brother. I've done it. I've screamed at God at the top of my lungs because that's how much I believe in him. Amen. That's how personal I feel like my relationship is. If I can't be myself with the Father, then I'm going to stop preaching this gospel.
He was a young man, a teenager. That was him. He was really preaching. His name is Sam Kinison. Today, he's featured in People magazine. He's been the boyfriend of Jessica Hahn, and of course, if you watch MTV, you've seen the Wild Thing sexist, sensual video of Sam Kinison and Jessica Hahn. That was him actually preaching the gospel as a teenage evangelist. This is Sam Kinison today.
I used to preach. I used to study the Bible. It's a pretty fascinating book. People go, "Sam, do you think you could do it again? Do you think you could ever be able to preach again? Do you think there's anything left inside you that has any good to it, that could shine a light into somebody's lost way? Do you think if you had to, if your soul was riding on the line and you had to testify and you had to make a commitment, if it was a final answer, what would you do?" Well,
You think that's funny? I don't. If Sam Kinison just stopped there mocking his own evangelistic style, which incidentally is a caricature and has nothing to do with serious religious broadcasters or credible ministers that I know, if he just mocked himself as he was, One might consider it nothing more than a cultural stereotype. Kinnison doesn't stop there. He deliberately mocks Christ. He even takes on the crucifixion.
He's on the cross. 30, 40 Christians standing around going, it's a shame that he has to die. And Jesus is going, well, maybe I wouldn't have to. Somebody get a ladder and a pair of pliers.
In case you couldn't understand what he said, while Christians were weeping at the cross, he said, Jesus is up there saying, would somebody get a ladder and a pair of pliers? Then he takes on the resurrection.
Jesus had a tough life, boy. I read about that guy. Jesus is the only guy that ever came back from the dead that didn't scare the of everybody, man. He's the only guy that ever crawled out of a grave where people didn't go, oh, ah!
Now, I want to acknowledge an indebtedness to a longtime member of our staff, Mr. Don Miller, who's one of our production assistants and is one of the people responsible for what goes on the air from a behind-the-scenes standpoint. Don, you've been studying comedy for how many years?
Oh, I've always been interested, since high school. I like anything that makes me laugh, so I bought comedy albums and have a whole collection of things at home and so on.
What's different about this kind of sacrilegious satire from true comedy? What is the nature of true comedy, and what are people like Kinnison doing that are different?
It's a way of getting a cheap laugh with this kind of comedy. Sometimes people laugh out of embarrassment. For some comics, that's the only way they can do it. It could be a cultural thing. Sometimes the beginning comics are working the small nightclubs, and subtle satire doesn't always work in a crowd of drunks, so they have to get dirty.
But they're not just getting dirty. They're specifically attacking Christian doctrines, deeply held beliefs. Have we crossed over some type of cultural threshold? I can't imagine this sort of thing being tolerated several decades ago. What's happened in this country to its values that's allowed people to get up on a stage and do this sort of thing?
Cable has come along, and cable has found comedy a cheap way to fill time and to get ratings at the same time. Plus, since cable is over cable and not over the airwaves, it's not governed by the FCC, so the language can be a little bit freer. So cable is part of that. And that's where most of these excerpts come from the cable specials.
Don, I'm very grateful to you. You're the one who brought this subject to my attention and compelled me to do a show on it, and you provided me with some videotapes of these people. I watched the videotape of Sam Kinison last night, and Don, I wept inside. I was sick at heart. Here in this club, there were hundreds of young people laughing hysterically while he did comedy routines. I mean, these are excerpts that you selected as being appropriate to play. One of the routines was he was describing Jesus having oral sex with the disciples at the Last Supper. In another one, Christ was urinating in the bathroom while a crippled man comes up to be healed. And I saw these kids in that audience as the camera took shots of them laughing hysterically. And I thought, my God, when is a thunderbolt from heaven going to land? I mean, how can people do this? It's so outrageous. And yet people were laughing at it. I mean, they were really into it. The more he mocked Christ, the more he tore down the sacredness of the gospel, the more people laughed. What has happened to people in terms of their laughter responses? Where has comedy gone? I mean, is it outrageousness? Is it like rock and roll? The person who can be the most obscene and the most incredible really gets the attention?
There's a lot of similarities to it. At a rock show, for example, I can't understand why everybody is going crazy over something that sounds like a lot of noise to me. A lot of people are laughing just out of embarrassment, but most people came there because they wanted to see him, so apparently they're on his side.
From your standpoint as a student of comedy, is comedy fundamentally different than it was from the Milton Berle, Bob Hope days? And if so, what is fundamentally different about it?
There's a number of things. There's a bit of a resurgence in comedy at this point. The number of comedy clubs across the U.S., there's about 300 now, and it wasn't that way 10 years ago. There seem to be more comedians around, but it's interesting that when it comes to really good comedy, that's where the field is wide open. You have more comedians, but they're not very good either. There's thousands of comics trying to get on to Carson or Letterman, yet the producers of these shows will tell you that it's still a struggle for them to find really good comedians. And with cable, of course, you now have 50 channels to choose from, and you need a lot of talent to fill all those channels. And so we're kind of dredging from the bottom now.
I am a sinner. I have sinned against you.
Wow, what a newsflash. Who are these people? Responsible Christian broadcasters or greedy media sluts?
You recognize the church lady.
I don't know how you feel about it, but I am getting pretty sick and tired of these church people. I have just about had it with these church people, all of them. You know what I say we ought to do with these churches? Tax them. Tax these
Tom, Boston, how do you feel about that? Does what he said bother you? It angers me. I'm infuriated that somebody like that can get on a stage, put out a record album, use the media of America, and call those of us in the Church of Jesus Christ those kinds of names and tell us to tax him. Tax nothing. Let's up the tax on George Carlin.
Well, first of all, you get on the media and use the media to espouse your message, so...
No, I do, but I don't use foul language, and I don't use those insulting, vulgar, denigrated kinds of terms.
You pass your message along in a different way. I don't think there's anything wrong with mocking and making fun of religion, just like we make fun of the government or the president or anything else in our society.
How about Jesus Christ? How about mocking him on the cross? He's dying for the sins of the world, and Kinnison is saying Jesus should have said, "Give me a ladder and a pair of pliers."
Hey, that's one example, but I mean, there's also people like Jerry Falwell and Jim Baker and Jimmy Swaggart, all these ones that are just you set themselves up for it, for crying out loud.
But what about the satire of Christ, the person of Christ?
Hey, I think if Christ were around, he probably, number one, could take it, and number two, might enjoy the fact that these people are making other people happy. Jesus Christ, who gave his body and his blood for our sins, would tolerate Sam Kinison comparing it to a homosexual oral sex orgy? Hey, it's making people laugh. So no one's going home and having homosexual orgies because Sam Kinison said it, anything like that, I mean, would you censor or object to people if they made fun of New Age religions or Eastern religions? Would that
I'll
bother
tell you this much. If I could be in government and make the laws, if Sam Kinison said something like that, I'd throw him in jail as fast as you could say.
How about if he was making fun of New Age religions? Would you send him in jail then?
If he was using that kind of language and he was personally denigrating in that insulting, vulgar fashion, yes, I would. I told my staff before I come in here, I consider Hinduism and Buddhism to be diabolical religions that are a lie of Satan. But I respect the fact that even the people who believe what I think is a lie may be very sincere, and I think as human beings they don't deserve to be treated in that kind of way.
Well, the only other thing I can say to you is you should take your own advice. You were saying before that if you didn't like what you're hearing on a thing, to just shut it off. Well, you can do the same thing. Don't buy their records.
No. I'm sick of that stupid so-called First Amendment argument. If you don't like it, you can turn it off. It doesn't shake, man. That doesn't give anybody the right to do anything and have a license to say anything they want to say. You still can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Basically, all they're doing is the Jim Baker, Jimmy Swaggart, Jerry Falwell, who they're making fun of.
No, they're not. He said tax the mother blanks. Tax them. And the audience yelled and cheered. No, George Carlin didn't say anything about the homeless people who are sheltered, the hungry people that are fed, the bodies that are sick that are in Christian... No, George Carlin didn't say anything about the good deeds that are being done by representatives of Jesus Christ. That means taxing Mother Teresa. That means taxing the Salvation Army. That means taxing the Presbyterian Hospital.
He's making a joke,
I'm sorry, I don't laugh, and I don't think it's a joke. Jerry, Peoria.
All these comedians are doing is making an entertainment value, and they're milking it for everything they can get. And if your religion is that shaky that it bothers you that much, or if you're that immature that you're taking it seriously and anything beyond that, you have serious problems with your faith.
I don't believe you. There used to be something in the society called the sanctity of the sacred. There were certain things that were just off limits. You just didn't talk about them in public. Language you just didn't use.
You're talking about it in public?
I'm exposing the error of what they're doing and letting people know so we can do something in this country to put a stop to it. I'm letting people who are sleeping in the pew get a good jolt to wake up and understand what's going on with people, sick minds like you are out there laughing at. You got to have a sick mind if you laugh at that, friend.
It's entertainment value, Bob. And this, what you were calling this garbage about the First Amendment and all that stuff, that First Amendment is the same thing that protects you right now as you're talking.
No.
yet?
No, I'm sorry, sir. It is something much different. I am not doing what these people...
It's something much different to you.
This bother you?
Who was it? Who could it possibly be? Was it... Oh, I don't know. Satan?
That's the church lady. They're laughing about Satan.
They're making people laugh, and they're getting rich.
Well, a while ago, the church leader called people like me, quote, greedy and media sluts.
Well, Bob,
I don't like it.
I was on hold on your line for 25 minutes, and the only thing I heard the first 25 minutes was you asking for money.
Listen, I want to tell you, the entire budget of this ministry for an entire year that sees thousands of people helped in incredible ways, that sees victims of rape and incest brought back to wholesomeness, that sees kids on drugs and homeless off the streets, put in homes and given shelter and put in detoxification programs. The money that George Carlin makes in a month would cover the budget of this ministry for a year.
But that's his job. That's what he does, and he's having an entertainment value with it.
No, what he's doing is polluting sick minds. He ought to be thrown in jail for it.
No, he's not polluting any sick minds. If any mind is polluted by that and takes that seriously, they were already sick to begin with. Long before he ever got to them. That's like...
That may be the only intelligent thing you've said, Jerry. Maybe they were sick to begin with. Maybe you are. I'm sorry, but maybe you are. You know what you need? You know the difference between you and me? Jesus.
What?
Jesus is the difference. You see, Jesus is my Savior. I believe Jesus rose from the dead. I believe he suffered on the cross for my sins. And when somebody mocks the nails in his hands and feet, when somebody mocks him coming back to defeat the devil, hell, death, and the grave, and to rise again, and that is the hope by which I live, you better believe that upsets me. And the difference between you and me is that I believe that with all my heart, and to you it is a mockery. That's the difference, Jerry.
If I was to believe that Jesus died for my sins, and if I was to believe that he saved me from on the cross, I would not let an act of entertainment shake my faith.
It's not shaking my faith. It's not shaking my faith.
Well, it must have not shaken enough that you got to do a show about it.
Do you think God was immature because he gave the Ten Commandments, says anybody takes my name in vain, you take him outside of the city and stone him? Do you think God was so insecure he had to command people to be killed if they took his name in vain, that God wasn't big enough to say, I can take and let them curse me all they want? Hey, buddy, God laid down the rules. God laid down the rules and said, that's the way it is. You don't take my name in vain, you're dead. And what we say is, you take God's name in vain today, we'll make you a millionaire. That's the problem with it.
We'll get government off your backs and out of your lives. Yeah, but they still want to tell you what magazines you can read, and they still want to tell you what rock lyrics you can listen to, and they still want to force your kids to pray in school, and they still want to tell you what you can say on the radio. Why did they decide that? Because they got a letter from a minister in Mississippi. A Reverend Donald Wildman in Mississippi heard something on the radio that he didn't like. Well, Reverend, did anyone ever tell you there are two knobs on the radio?
Yeah, and there are FCC regulations which aren't enforced and would put people like George Carlin out of business overnight if they were enforced. Joining me in the studio, Don Miller, who's one of our production assistants here, a man behind the scenes who's responsible for a lot of what you hear in the air, and a man who helped us put this show together, who's been a comedy buff and expert for a number of years. I should tell you, this is not just anybody here. This man has been a member of the same church for 40 years. This is a fine Christian man who is very dedicated and love the Lord and has been a big help to this ministry. And when he takes on a subject like this, he's taken it from a Christian perspective. I want to ask you, Don, what makes a joke? Are there some basic elements that causes a person to laugh? And what is it in these sacrilegious satire jokes that makes people laugh?
There's a number of formulas that can be used. Now, when a good comedian makes you laugh, it looks very spontaneous, but you're listening to something that's a routine that's been carefully written and rehearsed. There's maybe like 5 people in the world who can completely ad-lib a complete comedy routine, but there are definitely logical formulas. Most jokes that you hear are simply analogies in puzzle form, and satire, of course, is dealing with mocking a certain point of view, and that's where the individuality comes from. And the people that laugh at your jokes usually agree with your point of view.
So you're suggesting that when these people make these jokes, mocking Christ, that they've got an audience full of people who are tuned into the same kind of philosophy, and that's why there's this sympathy that results.
Well, a lot of the comedians, going way back to Lenny Bruce, for example, and going back to present with the ones that are really bad and raunchy. If you go back into their lives, they've been hurt by something. Even in Sam Kinison's case, he had some marital problems, and his brother committed suicide just a few months ago, and things like this that kind of add fuel to the fire. And so there's some bitterness. It's bitter humor.
Are these people then kind of cathartically acting out unfortunate circumstances in their own lives, and instead of turning to the Lord for healing and forgiveness, instead of getting good counseling and therapy to help work through it, the comedy becomes their therapy? Instead of turning to God, they mock God, and it's their way of dealing with things that they can't handle internally.
Well, that's true. There's nothing like when I'm upset about something. There's nothing like talking to somebody else about it and saying, "Well, I don't like it. I think he's a jerk too," and having them agree with me. That makes me feel good. They're kind of doing the same thing, but it's in a form of comedy, what they call comedy.
Yeah, except that the jerk is Jesus in this case that they're trying to call a jerk. Pete, L.A. Go ahead, Pete.
I think the main appeal of these comedians is that they hit center, they hit target on certain hypocrisy and superstitions in religion that appeals to a lot of people who see through that, and yet these people are frustrated because when they turn on the air, they hear people like evangelists and stuff who keep spouting it instead of poking holes in it.
Okay, now excuse me, Pete, but it's one thing to crack a joke about Tammy Faye Baker's eyelashes.
Yeah,
right? And her air-conditioned doghouse.
Right.
It is, and I think even that's questionable, because I'm not sure we should be picking on public figures who can't talk back and ridiculing them. Just absolutely but it's quite another when we take the person of Jesus Christ. If you don't even believe he's God, he's the most influential person in human history. No. Even an atheist has to agree with that. To treat him and to use the kind of homosexual crudity that Kinison uses, you don't think that's too far?
I'm not saying I like Kiniston as my ideal comedian. However, I think a lot of that is fine. I mean, what they're doing is they're satirizing a lot of people's compulsive adherence to rigid dogma as opposed to thinking for themselves, and I think that's really what it's all about.
But wait a minute. There were sick and suffering people who came to Jesus Christ. I watched Sam Kinison mocking lepers and cripples.
Well, he wasn't really mocking them.
Now, he was mocking Christ healing them.
I think he was mocking the beliefs, the rigid beliefs in the whole system of Christianity or really fundamentalist Christians.
Well, let's put it this way: if he told jokes that he tells now, 3,000 years ago in the Judaic theocratic state, would he be alive?
I don't know. We know very little about all the details of the society at that time.
No, but we know what the Levitical laws were, and we know that this kind of thing would have demanded capital punishment. Now, this isn't a theocratic society. I don't want to kill Sam Kinison. What I'm saying is that people get by with things today, and they hide behind the First Amendment.
Well, it's not hiding behind it. I think the First Amendment is completely relevant. It's like probably the most significant issue of this whole thing that we're talking about.
I'm not sure. Listen to this.
We want to be forgiven for checking into a motel with a prostitute who danced naked on the dresser while we sat in bed with little Jimmy out of his pulpit. And now we say we're sorry. How convenient.
You think that's funny, Pete? It's mocking Jimmy Swaggart and what happened. I think what happened to Jimmy Swaggart was tragic. I think there should be some love and forgiveness and some understanding. I don't think it helps to heal a tragedy like this in our society to mock it in this kind of fashion.
The tragedy was Jimmy Swaggart in the first place pretending to be so pious and so asexual when actually he turned out to be a regular human being, but he was the problem. What he did wrong was try to cover that up. A lot of people are open to, like Jessica Hahn. I think I actually admire her now. I have a lot of respect for her.
Oh, come on.
I'll tell you why.
Pete, I'm sorry.
Because she's open about her sexuality, and that's a normal human thing to be.
She is undraping her body to show all of her slightly modified you-know-what. I don't think that's honesty. I think that is whorish.
We're born without clothes. It's only society conditioned that
Pete,
we're so uptight about.
Pete, who made the first set of clothing? God did, friend.
No.
God made the first clothes. No, God covered up the naked body first. God did it.
I disagree.
Well, read the Bible. It's in the Bible.
Well, I don't agree with everything necessarily that's in the Bible.
No wonder you wouldn't be upset by this today.
Well, there are lots of reasons. I think a lot of atrocities have been committed in the name of religion and Christianity in particular, like the Inquisition and the Crusades.
Oh, I'm tired of hearing about it, the Inquisition. We've got an unholy inquisition of Christian values going on in the comedy scene today that absolutely makes anything that happened in medieval times pale by comparison.
Oh, how many people are being murdered because we're talking words here as opposed to violence and physical...
I know the old argument. Guns kill, Playboy doesn't. Just ask a woman who's been raped by a man who read the magazine.
I just think that there's a lot legitimately to be attacked about pious religion, and that's mainly hypocrisy and superstition.
I don't think what we have is any kind of constructive comedy here that deals with things in a truly humorous context. I think what we have are individuals who are godless, capitalizing upon the unfortunate circumstances of others, who have failed like human beings do fail, but who will not leave them alone, but instead leap upon them like a bunch of hungry vultures to feed upon their carrion and in turn laugh all the way to the bank. I think it's sick, it's pathetic, and I'm disgusted with it.
Yeah, people say, you think Jesus is coming back? Sure. What's it been, 2,000 years? Boy, I sure don't want to dampen anybody's optimism here.
Mark, Peoria, Sam Kinison mocking the coming of Christ. The Apostle Peter warned us about that, said there would be scoffers in the last day coming, and he told us when it happened, no, the end is near. It bother you?
Not really.
Yeah?
The reason I'm calling you is I've got 2 tickets to see him tomorrow night here in Peoria. And I was wondering if you'd like to join me in the 3rd row.
I do not want to go to a neo-Nazi rally to watch people salute Hitler who murdered 6 million Jews. I do not want to go to a gathering of the Ku Klux Klan to listen to them talk about the niggers and the way that they've harmed the future of America. And I don't want to go to a Sam Kinison concert to watch a small brain use big dirty words and mock Jesus Christ. That man needs help. He's had hurts and problems in his own life, but bending his bitterness in near unpardonable sin blasphemy is not something I want to behold, and I think you're pretty sick for wanting to do it yourself, Mark. I think you need help, and you need Jesus.
No, he's the best comedian in this country. I mean, Sam Kinison rules.
You sound like, you know what you sound like? The same mentality of the kids who say, Motley Crue rules. I got a feeling there's the same attitude, the same mentality.
Hey, I like Motley Crue. I've seen him 3 times in concert.
Motley Crue and Sam Kinison, why not? They party together, you go see them together. You know what? They're laughing all the way to the bank, man. You need Jesus, Mark. You need to ask God to forgive you. You need to turn those tickets over to the Lord.
I got 3rd row. There's no way I'd turn the tickets over.
You may have 3rd row at Sam Kinison, but I want you to know, you go, you're going to have front row in hell. Comedy does digress from entertainment to apostatizing evil. Lenny Bruce and Red Fox paved the way for offensive humor with their profane and lewd acts. Contemporary comedians like Sam Kinison and George Carlin have further contorted comedy by adding perversions against God and theology. Comedy has deteriorated from the use of vile language to vulgar mockery of religion. The lack of restrictions on language and subject matter permits Sam Kinison, George Carlin, and others to sabotage what's sacred. Laughing is healthy, but subjecting your soul to the repulsive ravings of a godless comic is not. The Bible tells us to think about whatever is true, whatever is noble, and whatever is right. You won't get that from Sam Kinison or George Carlin. Don't be misled by the Screamer or Mr. Seven Dirty Words. Their agnostic acts are designed to shock you into amusement and into the arms of the devil, discarding your integrity by allowing the sacred to be slandered is no laughing matter.
This is the end of Side 1. Please turn the cassette over at this point for the continuation of the message on Side 2.
I'm sure Christians are nice people, but as hard as they might find it to believe, I do have my own personal comment when they tell me I'm going to hell if I haven't been born again. Pardon me for getting it right the first time.
People are looking for their religion everywhere.
I mean, every channel has every, can they all be right? Every evangelist or everybody has their own thing. I saw Jimmy Swaggart the other day, who... No, but you know what he was doing? Jimmy's all right. Actually, my favorite thing about Jimmy is he's Jerry Lee Lewis's cousin. Now, that's heavy. Jimmy himself has no talent. The Lord Jehovah has given unto you these 15... Wait. 10 commandments for all to obey.
In her act, she plays a surfer girl who gives herself an abortion. She butchers the Christian concept of the sanctity of life. A coat hanger, freezer of the fetus that would eventually hamper her surfing time. This character is the invention of Whoopi Goldberg, one of the many comics who mock religion and basic Christian concepts. One of her contemporaries is Elaine Boozler, who thinks the prevention of condom advertisements due to pressure from religious groups is ignorant. And let's not forget Sam Kinison, who portrays Jesus as a foul-mouthed lunatic. Kinnison's latest act is the screaming remake of the Troggs' classic song Wild Thing. In the video, ex-girlfriend Jessica Hahn slithers lustily on the floor as Kinnison and his lewd friends enjoy a hedonistic heyday. Kinnison lasciviously mounts the willing Hahn as friends cheer him on. Former church secretary Hahn says she and ex-minister Sam Kinison talk about religion. She believes both she and Sam are closer to God now than they've ever been before. Others have to wonder if Sam Kinison even knows God. They think he's a device of the devil and must be censored before he sacrilegiously sabotages more Christian values. Saturday Night Live is notorious for its mockery of religion. NBC's director of editorial services, Albert Kroger, praises the popular show for its fun and liveliness. Targets of the show's fun include the Last Supper of Christ and God himself. Both are transformed into laughing matters. Perhaps the most popular character in the show is the church lady. She portrays a moralistic saint who feels she's superior to everyone. She blasphemes God by taking on his attributes and passing judgment on her guests. Should comics like the church lady, Sam Kinison, and Whoopi Goldberg be censored? Where do we draw the line to protect what's sacred? Carol Burnett spurns raunchy comedy as an easy way to get laughs. Milton Berle agrees, believing contemporary comics are loose and depend far too much on obscenities. Old-time movie director Hal Roach of Our Gang and Laurel and Hardy fame claims that profanity in comedy is used to shock rather than amuse. He insists comedy doesn't need to rely on crudity. Many people don't evaluate the moral implications of comedy in future generations. Well, should we legislate public morality?
I flew in on U.S. Air with a plane load of happy young Christians. You know how disconcerting it is to be the only person on the plane who cares if it goes down?
Jesus loves you. People look at Jim and Tammy. They say, Jim Baker, Jim, how could you sin? Look at Tammy and you have a big clue. And there's Oral Roberts, a man that said, God will take me away unless I get $8 million. Makes you think that God's a large man named Vinny going, where's my money, mother?
Next to me in the studio is Don Miller, without whom Talk Back with Bob Larson would not be possible, who's been with us for a long time and has been a great help and assistance. I deeply appreciate him, and he brought to my attention this particular subject, said it's something you got to deal with, and even gave me some videos to look at. Don, I never did look at all of them. I did look at a little bit of one last night. As I said earlier, as I looked at that Sam Kinison video and I saw him, and I don't even want to repeat some of the things I've already said before, they go without saying. Some of the crudity, some of the incredible blasphemies. Saw the audience cheering. My heart broke inside. I mean, my heart broke inside. I guess what I don't understand, explain to me. You're an expert in comedy. You've studied it for years. What is it about the nature of laughter that allows people to say things in a comedy context that they probably couldn't get by with saying under any other kind of circumstance? What type of license do we give to comedy that lets people do this?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of humor has to do with tragedy. I think that humor is something that God gave us to keep our sanity. Doctors can tell you a lot about the healing effects of laughter. If you ever meet someone who has absolutely no sense of humor at all, you're talking to a very dangerous person. And I think we've had a few callers in the past who didn't have a lot of sense of humor either, so you have to be very careful with that. It has to do with, I think, your background. Everybody's idea of what is funny is always just a little bit different. And so you get a certain crowd that likes a certain type of comedian. It tells a little bit about yourself, in fact.
Comic relief. Some people don't know what that is, but you can explain to the people what it is. It's a series of videos that have been fundraising ventures primarily for the homeless, and it's included some of the top comedy names in the country. I guess it's aired on HBO and so on. It's supposed to be this big philanthropic, selfless thing of these entertainers raising money for this charitable cause. I tuned in one time to one of these HBO specials. I don't have HBO in my home, but I just happened to... I was staying in a motel, and I flipped across the TV dial, and there they were. I could not believe the incredible filth, the horrible vulgarities. They're supposed to be doing something nice.
Yeah, it's for a good cause. They've had it for the past 2 years on HBO. It's a 4-hour special that they have every year, and they rerun it a few times. And it's raising money for the homeless. But after hearing some of the raunchy humor, I think the homeless should give a benefit to Straighten Out Comedy Relief. That's what I think.
Don, the future of comedy. Where are we going? I mean, I remember... I compare this to rock and roll because I'm not an expert in comedy. I am an expert in rock and roll. I remember watching Alice Cooper back in the middle 70s, and a guy was pretending to have sex with a corpse, and he was making love to this snake and doing these outrageous things on stage. And I thought, well, this is the worst it'll ever get. I mean, nothing worse than this can ever happen. Little did I know that the devil had someone in the wings waiting called Kiss, and shortly thereafter to be followed by Motley Crue, then to be followed by Slayer. Comedy. I watched that video you gave me, and I thought, it can't get any worse than this. I mean, it can't get any worse. Please don't tell me it's going to get any worse. What's going to happen to comedy?
Well, comedy goes in cycles. Every few years there's a glut of comedy shows on TV, and then sometimes there's nothing for a while. A lot depends on the economy. It depends on the political situation. President Reagan has been a lot of laughs. We'll see if Bush can do some funny things, too. Comedy is kind of a form of escape. If the political situation is really bad, if there's a war on, sometimes comedy is funnier because it's a way of escaping. You laugh at tragedy. A lot of comedy is based upon tragedy. It's a way of escaping.
Mr. Bush already did it. He named the wrong date for Pearl Harbor.
Good start.
Now, one can laugh at inadvertent things like that, and we all laugh at humor which is something that just happens that is absurd or unintended, and that's very natural. What strikes me about the sacrilegious satire is this stuff is very calculated. As you said earlier, and it was a very interesting point, these people are coming from their own bitterness, their own hurts, their own dysfunctionalism, and yet they're being made heroes and multimillionaires as they play this terrible venom out in front of the public. To me, that's incredibly tragic. I mean, these people, they need help. They don't need a bigger bank account, which people are giving them. Why can't people see through that? Why can't people say, Sam Kinnison's sick, he needs help? They said it about Jimmy Swaggart. They mocked him. Why did Sam Kinnison get by with it?
Well, I think part of it is that there just aren't any better comedians around. If there were better comedians around, maybe they would crowd out some of the bad comedians. And it could be just the tone of the thing, since cable has opened up more permissiveness in what you can say in the air. And thanks to Lenny Bruce and George Carlin and the 7 Dirty Words and so on, a little bit of more of that is permitted now. Even old-time comics that you thought were clean are getting dirty now, too, because you're starting to see their real selves on the air.
Television preachers are amazing. They say God talks to them. God talks to them, and they can only get a show on cable? I think it's terrible that there are TV stations that won't even advertise condom because of pressure from religious groups. Isn't that ignorant? Wouldn't it be great if we found out you could only get AIDS by giving money to television preachers?
John, Golden, Colorado. I consider that offensive and disgusting. I don't like being called ignorant.
Well, I'm sorry you feel that way.
How do you feel? This doesn't bother you?
Well,
all this type of stuff you've been hearing?
No, I'm an atheist. What I find amazing is, do you actually feel that your faith is threatened because there are some satirists out there?
My personal faith is not threatened. No, that isn't even the issue.
Do you think other people that have your faith are threatened by some satirists out there?
That isn't the issue. There are two issues involved here. First of all, we are setting a societal moral climate. And that climate is that nothing is sacred, nothing is taboo, that anything goes, and people can do what they well like no matter how insulting it and hurtful it is to another human being. That's the first thing, and I think that's sick. On a societal basis, that cannot be tolerated unless we want to go the way of Rome. Secondly, because I believe Jesus Christ is Lord, I am disgusted at anyone who treats it in that type of a fashion. Now, I don't worship Buddha, but I wouldn't tolerate a joke
about Buddha in that kind of way.
But, Bob, I'm an atheist, and I hear slurs of atheists on your program all the time, and I don't feel threatened by that.
What do you call a slur? Have I ever called you a mother blank? Have I ever used four-letter F verbs on you like you just heard Robin Williams using on Christians a while ago? You don't hear me use that kind of language on you as an atheist. I don't denigrate you in that kind of filthy, vulgar, disgusting way that these people do Christians. There's no comparison, John.
Well, there's no intrinsically... A word is neither intrinsically good or bad. There are societies where the word bloody is offensive, and it isn't in our society.
I understand that, but we operate in a cultural context. All profanity is relative to its meaning in that society, but that's the whole point. That's what Jesus talked about, the motive of the heart, and it's what the person's trying to say when they say motive. And an Englishman who says bloody has an intent behind it. He is intending to defy convention and morality. He's intending to be profane when he says it.
Your religion isn't going to be threatened at all. Nobody's going to take off CBN or see all the Christian networks on TV.
Excuse me. But George Carlin is preaching a message. Tax them, get them out of business, get them off the air. This kind of mockery leads to the lack of respect for what religious broadcasting is doing. Do you think these people wouldn't be laughing all the way to the bank if me and other religious broadcasters we put out of business? They'd love it.
Well, Jimmy Swaggart laughed all the way to the bank. It's just that he stopped in a motel room along the way.
Oh, that's a cheap shot, and it's... Listen to this.
He's up in heaven right now. They're going, why don't you go back down to earth? Be a symbol of peace and love to the world. Help. He's going, yeah. Sure. Help, huh? Yeah, I'd like to help. Tell him I'll be there as soon as I can play the piano again!
Now, for the people who couldn't hear that, John, that's God talking to Jesus, and he's saying, go down to earth and be a symbol of peace, and he says, sure, as soon as I can play the piano again. He's referring to the nail prints in the hands of Jesus Christ.
Well, that's fine.
That's fine?
Oh, yeah. That's still not taking your religion off the air, and you're still free to preach whatever you want to, and so is Jimmy Swaggart and Jim Baker and Jerry Falwell, and you're not being denied your right to preach your word.
Not yet. Not now. But you seriously question for a moment that Sam Kinison or George Carlin would miss an opportunity to get us off the air if they could? Of course they would.
So if the churches got taxed, you're saying that people wouldn't give to the churches anymore? You mean that people would have that little faith that now all of a sudden they don't get a tax break, so now they're not going to give money to the church?
I'm saying that many of the beneficent services that are provided to society by churches would cease because they could no longer afford to do it. I'm saying it is fundamental to the heritage of this country to separate church and state, that you don't tax the church. The power to tax is the power to destroy, and it would destroy the church, and then you would have a secularist state putting the church out of business very quickly, and it would then have the power to control what they say and what they don't say, and we'd be a step away from communism and totalitarianism, and I don't want that.
So make sure you don't tax ACLU at the same time. I want to make sure of that, too.
You tell me what the ACLU has done to benefit suffering humanity. What they've done is benefit pornographers and perverts.
They've also allowed you people to stay on the air, too.
In a few selected cases to salvage their bad public relations image, they've stepped in only occasionally on the behalf of somebody in a persecuted religious position. It doesn't represent 1/10 of 1% of what the wacko things they've done on the other side of the coin.
So you would tax the ACLU?
You better believe I would if I were in a position to do it.
See, that just furthers the hypocrisy of your church.
No, the ACLU is not a religious charitable organization acting on behalf of a deity to carry a message of faith to suffering humanity. They are political lobbyists, period.
Well, let's see, the Boy Scouts don't do that either, so we better tax the Boy Scouts, too.
You're going to compare the ACLU to the Boy Scouts?
Well, when it comes to taxation, sure.
No, I don't compare the Boy Scouts. I don't consider philanthropic activity on behalf of human good in the same league as the American Civil Liberties Union defending Playboy and Penthouse. No, I don't. I think they're two so totally, absolutely separately terms, and the fact that you're willing to do it shows the blurring of moral distinctions in your mind, but then you're an atheist, you don't have those kinds of morals.
I don't have your hang-ups. I'm not a weak person.
Excuse me. Believing in absolute morality and decency coming from the edicts of God is considered weakness. I'm some kind of weak little wimp because I happen to believe what God said is true.
No, I have a moral code too, but I just don't base it on some boogeyman in the sky.
What don't you do?
I don't kill people.
That's because you can't. How do we know you wouldn't if you could? English common law system ingrained in our society. The commandments of God, and you as an atheist are subject to them. How do we know what you do if you didn't have those rules?
Because I have a moral code that's based upon scientific laws and not some kind of mythology.
I don't know. Darwinian evolution teaches the survival of the fittest, and it seems to me that murder could be justified in that name. The communists have done it. They have killed in the name of survival of the fittest and Darwinianism.
Well, I don't really consider the Russian society an atheistic society. Maybe you do, but they have created the government as their religion.
But they're officially atheist.
Well, yeah, in your definition, and that's where you distort the whole...
Why don't you live there? Why don't you live there? Why don't you get a boat to Moscow?
Because we have organizations like the ACLU that make this a great country.
John, the ACLU wouldn't be tolerated to exist in the Soviet Union, and that's an atheistic society.
That's my point. That's why I don't move there, because it is not an atheistic society. They have their government as their
Well, it's
religion.
the closest you can get on Earth. It's the finest you can find for what you want. I don't know why you're sticking around here for. I don't know why you let people like me abuse you every day. I wouldn't be abused.
I don't feel abused by you, Bob. I'm not threatened by you. You can scare a lot of other people out there that are weak-minded, but you can't scare me.
You're a strong atheist, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't have to say I believe in God or I don't believe in God. I know there isn't any God. It's not a question of belief. It's a question of knowledge.
And when the Scripture says the fool has said in his heart there is no God?
That's your Scripture.
John?
Yeah.
I'm glad you listened.
Imagine that, Reverend. You can actually change the station. It's called freedom of choice, and it's one of the principles this country was founded upon. Look it up in the library, Reverend, if you have any of them left when you finish burning all the books.
Troy, Albuquerque, New Mexico. You find that funny?
I think Sam Kinnison's a scream, Bob. And I'm also a big Carlin fan. I've seen him twice.
You heard all the 7 dirty words?
Oh, over and over.
What about when Kinnison mocks being an evangelist? And he himself was an evangelist, you know.
I know that. I think your guest had a point there when he said, Ronald Reagan was pretty funny this year. Let's see what Bush can do. These people, religious people as well as politicians, just set themselves up for humor. Jimmy Swaggart is a scream, I think. When I saw his tearful oration, I was rolling with laughter. So it's just comedy basically is people pointing out things that we already know that are just kind of funny in our society, and I think the church is one of the funniest.
The church is funny. Well, Sam Kinison thinks so. Hang on, Troy.
I used to preach. I used to study the Bible. It's a pretty fascinating book. People go, Sam, do you think you could do it again? Do you think you could ever be able to preach again? Do you think there's anything left inside you that has any good to it, that could shine a light into somebody's lost way? Do you think if you had to, if your soul was riding on the line and you had to testify and you had to make a commitment, if it was a final answer, what would you do? Well,
Think that's funny, Troy?
Yeah, I do. I'm an entertainer myself. I'm a juggler. And, in front of kids, I do one show, which is tasteful. And when I'm in front of adults who are out having a good time, my humor gets raw. Profanity sells, Bob, and you can't get around that.
I have Don Miller, who's a comedy expert, in the studio with me. I want to ask you a question, Don. I'm putting you on the spot here about Troy. How much do you think the personal life of a comic enters into what he does? It seems to me that a decent man is going to tell decent jokes, and a vulgar man is going to tell vulgar jokes. How much of it is a reflection of what they are, of their own psyche?
It can vary because it depends on the person. I was doing stand-up comedy about 10 years ago, and I had absolutely nothing profound to say. I just wanted to make people laugh. That was it, just plain and simple. Some people are giving a political speech. It just has more jokes to it. It reminds me of back in the 60s, Dick Gregory started out doing funny jokes as a comedian, but then later as he went along, his humor started getting a little bit more bitter. He was trying to change the world more than actually entertaining people. Even today, he still tells a few jokes once in a while, but he's more of a political commentator.
Okay, in your case, Troy.
Yes.
I'm suggesting that the kind of humor that you use or are willing to use, I think you're prostituting yourself, first of all, because you're playing the crowd, doing what they want. You're getting down and dirty because you know it'll line your pocket.
Well, that's the only way to get a paycheck in the entertainment biz, Bob.
Well, hey, you can probably go out on the main.
Like you
can probably go out in the main streets of Albuquerque and sell your body and make more money. I mean, there are plenty of homosexuals cruising, I'm sure, who would pay a lot more. Why don't you do that?
Well, even if atheists draw the line somewhere. It all comes back to the First Amendment, and the same right that you have to espouse your garbage, they have to espouse theirs. And,
excuse me. My garbage?
Your garbage. I mean, what are you going to do when you get up the pearly gates and Jesus asks you for his cut? Come on. You're funny.
What?
The reason I listen to you, Bob, is you're funny. Every time I hear you save a psychopathic, drug-addicted Satanist, I'm rolling on the floor screaming with laughter. You're very funny.
Excuse me. I remember young lady Sharon being in these studios not many days ago, who was living on the streets eating out of garbage cans. Her life is totally, absolutely different today, and you call her some type of psychological pervert or whatever.
Well, I don't think you or God had anything to do with that. I think she made a commitment within herself.
And if we hadn't been here
through saying she believed in Christ, hey, that's fine.
If we hadn't been here in the name of if we hadn't been here in the name of Jesus, she'd still be eating out of the garbage cans. You show me one atheist that's doing what we're doing every day to alleviate human suffering.
Well, I do a lot of volunteer work with my juggling, Bob.
And you also go tell dirty jokes when it suits the time. I'm getting a little tired of you atheists ripping us to pieces, wanting us out of business. You're not doing what we're doing. You're not alleviating human suffering. You're not helping humanity. But you want to mock us and call us ignorant and tell us we're filled with garbage because we do reach out. You want to call these people psychopaths. I'll tell you something. They're victims of incest and rape who have been restored to wholesomeness. There are kids off drugs today. There are kids who are killing animals in the name of the devil who aren't doing it any longer. And they've done it because we came to them in Jesus' name. You go to them in the name of nobody but an ancestral ape and do nothing. Well, I'm telling you, want to put me out of business?
I don't want to put you out of business.
No, because I'm too funny.
Your show was taken off the air.
Yeah, I know. You'd miss it because it's funny.
What would I do 2 hours a day? I'd go crazy.
Troy?
Yeah.
Don't go crazy. Go to heaven.
Well, hey, Bob, if there's a heaven, I'd like to be there, but I'm not going to go to hell. I'm not going to have a front seat in hell because I have third-row tickets to Sam Kinison. Give me a break. That was one of the funniest things you said today. That was a good one.
Do you enjoy my one-liners?
Oh, you're hot. Sometimes, when you're hot, you're hot. You crack me up sometimes better than, you're more creative than Stephen Wright sometimes. I'll give you that.
But I do have a cleaner mouth.
Well, you do. Well, you have to.
No, I do because I want to, because I believe it, because it really is clean. I don't talk like that in private life or public life.
Well, good for you, Bob. If that's the way you want to live, that's fine by me, and fine,
God loves you, Troy. God really loves you.
I don't believe in God. I've tried to find God. He makes himself inaccessible to me.
Seems to me, Troy, he's as close as a prayer, as near as a bended knee, and no more distant than a penitent heart. Try 1 out of 3. It won't be bad. Jason, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Jason?
I'd like particularly to address your comments about the church lady.
Yeah?
About saying that she's blasphemous in her self-righteousness and holier than thou and all that.
Yeah?
You don't believe you yourself are that type?
What? I'm blasphemous?
Well, no. I mean, you consider her blasphemous, yet, you're holding yourself above people.
How am I holding myself above anybody?
Well, I mean, you're coming down on agnostics and atheists and people of the like, left and right. I mean, that's
of course I am.
Here in your show.
I'm fed up with what they've done to this country. I'm fed up with what they've done to our society that lets this kind of garbage continue. I want to put a stop to it.
Have you ever heard of separation of church and state?
Certainly I have.
Brought that up.
Yeah, I certainly have.
Now, separation of church and state has brought us to where we are now. Now, if church and state were still together, then we would have the Spanish Inquisition going on.
No, the separation of the church from the state is putting us on the highway to hell.
Now, wait a minute. Now, you're not addressing the thing about the Spanish Inquisition.
No, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. The Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition were some wacko people in the Middle Ages who got on a personal vendetta. I'm sick and tired about hearing about the Spanish Inquisition, Tammy Faye's air-conditioned doghouse, and Jimmy Swaggart. I'm sick. You people just harp on the same thing over and over and over again. You have a few little cases, and you won't shut up about them. Move on to something new.
Well, what kind of case have you got, Bob? You know, I mean,
a savior who rose from the dead and who died for sins, and I don't like people making jokes about getting a pair of pliers to pull the nails out of his hands.
Hey, it was a statement of truth, was it not?
He could have called 10,000 angels to get him down from the cross. He died for you. He didn't need anybody to get him a pair of pliers.
You know, I mean, you really come down on all these comedians that, you know, I mean, you want to come down on everything. You want to come down on music. You want to come down on movies.
You're right. I want to come down on dirty movies. I want to come down on black metal music. I want to come down
on everything. You want to come down on everything that doesn't see things your way.
I want to come down on those things that are destroying our society, that are filthy and immoral, and are ruining an entire generation. You better believe I'm going to come down on it. You want me? You want me to shut up and go away so people can continue blaspheming Christ and creating the environment for more teenage illegitimacy and the murderous abortion of more babies. Well, I'm not going to stand by and let it happen.
What I'm saying is, I don't want you to shut up. I just, you know, I mean, I wish you would straighten up your show some. I mean, it's so slanted, I have to lay down to listen to it.
Don, there was a great line. Jason's got the best line of the day. Send that man a T-shirt. I don't have any to send him. Don, quickly, before I run out of time, I want to thank you for being with me today. I want to know, how do these people get by with this stuff? I mean, these jokes are incredible. How do they tell this stuff? That was television you gave me some clips of.
Yeah, well, the fact that it's in cable, of course, has made a big difference. In regular television, if you did dirty comedy, you just simply couldn't make it on the air. Red Fox, for example, did nasty humor, but most people feel that his late arrival in television at all was simply because of his act. They just wouldn't let him on the air.
Have you noticed something else about this show today? It's been all men. Is there something in the masculine psyche that's attracted to this bodiness, or are the women afraid to admit they laugh at dirty jokes? Or what is it? Any ideas?
That's kind of hard to say, although I would imagine the dirty jokes part of it appeals more to men in some ways. But that's hard to say. That's an interesting phenomenon.
Before we go, what is good humor? What is right humor? I mean, humor that's positive and uplifting and does something for the human spirit and for society.
Well, humor is a very individual thing, but as long as a person is laughing, that to them is humorous. To me, I like clever, satirical things, but other people like hee-haw type of humor. It depends on.
What does it say of a society? Wouldn't we like nothing but dirty jokes? Well, the clip you gave me last night, I watched the Richard Pryor thing for a few minutes, and I had to turn it off. I mean, it was like every third word was an F-verb. That's all he had to say.
Yeah, he's pretty good at that. Now, to me, it's very repulsive. To some people, they're used to it.
Maybe that's the problem, desensitization. If you enjoy the sacrilegious slander of such comedians as Whoopi Goldberg, Sam Kinison, you're engaging in godless behavior. Even the church lady blasphemes and satirizes what's sacred to others. We're all censors in our exercise of personal choice. We support vulgar comics when we watch HBO and Showtime specials or pay for tickets to see them on stage. The public encourages crude comics to continue their sacrilegious satire. Comedians rake in the bucks while raking our souls over the coals. Although laughter is healthy, the wrong kind of comedy is destructive. When we laugh at ethical atrocities, we begin to die a spiritual death. Proverbs 14 says, "There's a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Even in laughter the heart is sorrowful. In the end of that mirth is heaviness." Being amused by those who pervert the Lord is a sure sign that a godless attitude is invading your life. You might laugh now, but when Judgment Day arrives, the stage will be set for eternal death. And that's no joke.
This is the end of the message. For further information regarding other topics available on cassette and in printed form, write Bob Larson Ministries, Box 36A, Denver, Colorado, 80236.